And the second story here is out of Cyberscoop. We got some reporting on Google Threat Intelligence Group GTIG previewing what they're calling a cyber disruption unit within the context of this conversation of like being more aggressive, attack, hack back, defense forward, whatever you want to call it. Juanito, you got a thought on what this disruption unit will look like? Are we likely to just be seeing the same types of things that Microsoft has been actively doing with takedowns, partnering with law enforcement on taking things offline, malware removal type things? What do you think this disruption unit will be, and who's the market for this? Like, who are they selling this to?
The U.S. government. So I so I have very complicated feelings about this story, um, and I think that you could. This is one of those stories that people put down on paper, and I think they expect me to quite predictably come and like shit all over it and talk about how stupid it is and to judge it and whatnot. And
Oh, this is right up your alley. You've been asking for this stuff.
well, yeah, I have, but I think on different terms than would be expected for the terms that are being discussed here. So if you don't mind me kind of like expanding on this a little bit, if you just read the headline and say like cyber disruption unit, you're like, okay. And frankly, there's almost a discussion to be had about like, why weren't you disrupting these things before if you had the capability to? And that's a valid conversation to have. And I don't think most big companies have a good answer to that. And that's why we've been jumping up and down on top of them for many, many years, because some companies, in the form of empowered individuals, have been doing God's work for years now without any recognition whatsoever and disrupting things on the basis of their private sector positioning, capabilities, ability, or just the willingness to lean forward. So we've always looked at the mega giants who have all this access and capability, and they control half of the internet, and they can, sneeze and like blow some shit up, and not doing much of any of that always felt like just this egregious abnegation of responsibility. So I would like to set that aside and not talk about the ills of the past and not judge people on what has happened before, but simply to say, okay, I think it's cool that you are interested in doing this and you should do it. So I actually fully support the idea of this happening. Now, we would be naive and only be looking at we'd be naive to focus on the marketing copy of it without wondering why now? Like, why now? And the answer is quite obvious, and it's even mentioned in the same article. This is a discussion that's popping up around this idea of letters of marque. And that makes me partially more jaded about it, but only insofar as I mistrust the intentions of the people who are pushing it forward. However, that does not make me doom the effort or judge the effort or criticize the effort, because I think that if those people use their political capital, if people like Sandra Joyce use their political capital to move Google towards the idea of being more actively engaged in disrupting adversary operations and limiting damage, because they think, perhaps, I won't speak for Sandra's thinking, I don't know it, but perhaps because they think that this is the beginning of a gold rush into cyber offensive operations that will be enabled by the US government finally, finally in quotes, then whether that happens or not, I think you ultimately have to play the game we've been wanting them to play as responsible stewards of the internet on the way to trying to become, I guess, an offensive contractor, which I think you're going to have all kinds of interesting questions about being defense companies, like security companies that do offensive ops. You're going to have all kinds of interesting questions about, what's actually happening with the data that like goes into one side and ends up in the other. I don't think I don't think they're discussions that are bad, that are like poisoned in and of themselves. I just think that all of a sudden the people who want to be successful in this are going to go from lawyered up to the point where they couldn't take a piss without somebody standing next to them and approving of it, to all of a sudden very permissive and mentally flexible about what the policies and privacy implications and whatever the fucks um, that used to be these impossible lines will all of a sudden be very fungible. And you're going to see companies twisting themselves into a pretzel to represent themselves as something that before they would have denied they ever were. And where that takes us, if I wrote in 2015 that we were, you know, intelligence brokers because we were selling intelligence, then I think we're going to have to start getting very comfortable with being defense contractors if that's what we think we're selling. And I'm not saying that's a I'm not saying that's a bad look necessarily. I'm not saying that's not something you want. It's clearly not going to keep certain companies who think that this is just the opening of a hackback market of some sort that they haven't tapped before. Sure, go for it. This industry needs revitalizing somehow. If that's how you think that you're gonna like get your money, cool. But there will be another identity crisis here. And I'm very curious how you keep, like, if we thought the culture at Google and Microsoft and Amazon was fucking with the security space, I ask you to consider what the culture at Raytheon, Lockheed, and BAE looks like when it comes to this shit.
Costin, you see, I mean, I'm trying to understand the market. You said US government right off the bat. Like, if you're doing disruption and takedowns, I mean, how many of those are we hearing or seeing in a year when they're going one, two? What's the time on something like this? Like, why are you chasing after this market? One and two, if you're Google, you're like kind of one of the few companies who can do this though, with the kind of data they have. We just talked about it with VT, Project Zero, add in tag, add Mandiant in there. You feel like, okay, they have like the richness of everything to be able to do this. Do you feel, Costin, thoughts on it? Do you see disruption unit? It obviously flags some concerns.
Well, look, Microsoft perhaps was the most prominent player in this field with their digital crimes unit, which has been super, super active over the years, doing exactly this disruption in the sense of trying to seize domains through court orders, so leveraging lawyers, leveraging a lot of expensive resources to disrupt cyber criminal activity. So here, again, would be nice to have someone from Google, from TIG or TIG, who can actually speak specifically about this topic and what they're gonna do. But one of the kind of immediate benefits that I foresee from doing this is very positive PR. So whenever Microsoft was doing one of these shutdowns, either let's say trying to disrupt Sophacy, for instance, or different botnets and cyber criminal malware and seizing infrastructure, it was all very well received. Now I hear you, and you were asking before, you were asking the question, why aren't more companies doing that? And I can tell you at least why we were doing this at my previous job is because it is extremely expensive to leverage very well highly paid lawyers to draft all these court orders and subpoenas and whatnots to try to seize malicious infrastructure, which is in one way, targeting our customers. So because of that, we want it. I think that big, large US companies like Microsoft, like Google, they're better positioned to do it. While other players, I don't know, like not American companies, it may be more difficult for them. So if you're playing like strictly in the legal space, this is one of the things you can do. In particular, I quote Sandra Joyce, which is she related to Rob Joyce?
I don't think
Just
so.
random question, maybe just coincidence.
I asked that question before, and I think they're not, but I can't speak to it.
So she said, yeah, they want to do legal and ethical disruption. So what legal, it's pretty clear. Ethical disruption could be, I don't know, like if I do some very complex requests into a command and control server and it crashes, is it ethical? Maybe, I don't know. Obviously, if I hack into the CNC and wipe it, that don't know if that is ethical. But again, there are many shades of gray of things you can do with command and control servers, as Silas can probably tell us even better. So I don't know what Google will effectively do, but I lean more towards the legal side of things in the style of DCU and in the style of seizing infrastructure, shutting down the main CNCs, and disrupting these operations
Right.
like big botnets, essentially, that affect pretty much everyone on the internet.
This may not have
I
commercial ambitions. I think you guys might have nailed it on the
Mhm.
head in saying that, hey, Google is ceding this entire thing to Microsoft, who keep getting the DCU, and Microsoft and Justice Department keep getting these takedown
yeah.
headlines, and Google is left in the dark. And they're saying, hey, I have Mandiant, I have VT, I have all this data. We can be doing this. It may
They
not be a big
just suck
commercial
ass
thing.
at PR, dude. Like the biggest, honestly, like this is the lack of like successful marketing at GCP, at like the Google Cloud side of things and Google Cloud security, is a cultural problem. Uh, and it's a shame because you can see that even when you get people like John Holquist and a bunch of really great Mandiant analysts who were doing amazing PR value, just doing what they do every day, and then you buy them into Google, they stop producing any, like, a lot of that PR value. And I don't think it's because they got lazier or they decided they didn't want to do it anymore. I think it's because you have this weird policy and culture and like way around this that you that just takes away from that happening. uh, but I say that it's a PR problem because if you look at it as like, well, you're letting Microsoft get all the gains and do all the like soft power politicking. Yeah, in some way that Microsoft has done it more effectively, in large part because they tend to empower people more and are a little more like more, not a lot, but more, right? Like you do have like Dave Weston can come out and speak to his side of things. So and so can come out, and speak to John Lambert can go and speak to security widely. Like Brad Smith will show up to places and talk about, big Microsoft and this is what we think and can do. And Google just has a much harder time with stuff like that, sadly. Now, I actually think the commercial question makes a gigantic fucking difference here in a way that I'm not saying these people aren't thinking of. I'm saying that they're softballing it in a way that I don't know that they're thinking the argument through all the way, or they're not having to publicly because the dust hasn't settled. But let me paint a scenario for you. There's disruption, and then there's disruption enabled by what would be considered hacking or illegal activity of some sort. And we've talked about how like the bar is insanely low when it comes to US law. So I'm not saying hacking in an incendiary way. I'm saying like in like the dumbass DOJ way of like you have the username and password, this is being used for command and control. You could walk in, grab data, delete things, disable things, whatever. But if you use somebody's username and password without authorization, you're going to jail, buddy, right? Like that bullshit definition of hacking. So if I can disrupt things without hacking, then the question is not about the ethics of how do you do it ethically, but actually how do you ethically defend not doing it and not having done it up until this point, right? And I say any and all activity that the cyber disruption unit would do that had no requirement for legal stuff, which there's actually a lot when you're a company like Google, because you control DNS routing, because you control search indexing, because you control email filters, because you control like a million different things. Google Drive, the routing of certain, share links, like all kinds of shit. CAPTCHA data, safe browsing data, Chrome data, right? Like you have so much shit. At the ad network data that Google has is probably the greatest intelligence land like mine in the world. So there's these people are going to find that they can disrupt all kinds of shit if they actually want to, and the lawyers get the fuck out of the way for a change. But then the question is, what is the ethical valence of not doing it? And that's why I gave Shane Huntley so much shit about his offensive con talk a few years back, which I called like the politics of hand wringing, because like the idea was if you do things, then you're responsible for them. And God forbid you have any responsibility for anything. So maybe choose not to do things. And you're like, well, okay, I see how we got here. Thank you for your time. Now, cut over when you admit that you could be disrupting things, the question becomes, well, why wouldn't you? And I'm asking that because there's two variations here, right? What happens if you do hack things? What does that allow you to do, right? That you weren't able to do before. Cool. That depends on like what the letters of mark thing is, what the new policy thing is. But let's assume that doesn't happen at all. Or let's assume that it does happen in whatever asinine terms. And then the question becomes, what's the offering? Because I ask you, right? I am a company that got hacked. I am willing to pay Google, Mandiant, Raytheon to like hack whatever the fuck to disrupt this activity, to do, to get at the ransomware crew that got me. Does that mean that they hack and protect me, but not the other victims of the ransomware group? Does that mean that I pay to disrupt the thing, but you disrupt it for everybody else? Does that mean that if I ask you to do it, but then I'm like, actually, this is too expensive, I'm not going to pay for it, that you have the access to disrupting it, but you choose not to? Right? Like, it's suddenly no longer a good faith defenders of the internet, defenders of everyone's privacy. We do good things because they're good things and we're good people, therefore we do good things. All of a sudden, it's a fucking business. And I ask you, how are you going to market that? What are you comfortable saying about, like, well, we could save all these people right now, but it's going to cost you, right? Like, and that is a business model, but it requires you to answer some uncomfortable fucking questions.
Hey, the fact that Sandra went to a conference and announced this, and Google guys are in the background obviously building and preparing for this, suggests that there might be contracts coming down the pipe. Like some lobbyist somewhere says, hey, get prepped for this because the government is going to start handing out whatever you call it, letter of mark, whatever it is. Someone in Google is clear that there's a business here. If we put aside that this is a PR thing where they don't want to be left behind. Costin, some closing thoughts on this?
I think either way, this is a very cool initiative. It would be nice if other companies were doing the same, either for PR purposes or whatever. If you remember the DCU initiatives, they actually started a lot of very interesting things, including events, conferences, information sharing. So all of that, kind of advances the overall goal for everyone of things to be better, safer, and so on. Now, if this will have a commercial angle, I don't know that, but I am even happy if it's just like for PR purposes.
You're
Which is
cool with it.
actually,
You're into
I'm
this
cool with
disruption
it.
activity, yeah.
Just one thing, probably this is gonna cost money, and you are saying like, why haven't been doing this for before? I think it takes approval at the top, and people will always say like, what are we getting in exchange? And it's sometimes it's difficult to explain this positive PR angle when there's like no money involved. Like, yeah, we're gonna get some kind of good vibes and cookie points from the community, and unfortunately, I see this in a lot of companies that the leadership doesn't understand the value of these cookie points in the community and the respect from other companies and from your colleagues, which in my opinion is super, super valuable.